Hello, it's Wednesday, August 28th, 2026. Smith here, and it's a Wednesday chat that I come on and see if anybody wants to talk today. Sometimes I hit this just right, and three or four people will show up and we'll have an extended conversation for a while. Most of the time, nobody shows up, so I cut it short. I did think I was going to talk about progression in training today. It's really important to not only the efficacy of your training, but also your direction in training. As I've mentioned in previous podcasts, your direction is much more important than the goal because goals are going to change. Once you reach one goal, you will uh, seek another goal. But the direction is like a high mountain top, and you keep your eye on that mountain top while you are approaching your goals. If you have no goal per se, if training is just hobbyist, it's a hobby, train a couple of times a week, sit around, talk, have fun, uh, then this doesn't apply to you. But if you're a serious practitioner, it does. Training goals become very important. They're stepping stones. And you're going to wander down a uh, wild and craggy path to get to goals many times. Sometimes you really have to skirt the horizon because that's the way the path leads you. But you have that direction and you keep your eye on the mountain peak because that's the way you're headed. That's the way you choose to head yourself in life. One thing I've said many times is learning is not training. Teaching is not training. Training is not fighting. Yet fighting requires conversion factors that can only be given to you by your teacher, assuming they have gone through the process themselves. So let's look at each of these. In the learning phase, you're struggling and you are confronted with the immensity of the art. It's intimidating. I know it was for me. When I first started training, I think, my goodness, how am I ever going to learn all of this? And then when I was teaching, teaching is not training. I always had my own personal training, and a teacher should always have their own personal training aside from teaching. And then training is not fighting, but you have to have a successful progression in training. You don't want to learn something that's so far advanced you don't understand it or can do it. You want to do baby steps and then crawl, walk, run, and eventually you can accrue the skills necessary to approach fighting. And when you do approach fighting, that's a whole different world. Everything does not come off clean. And what becomes most important, what is paramount to fighting, is the conditioning that you have accrued through correct progression in training. So it's a step by step process. And I always have told people, you don't learn this in days, weeks, months, or years. You learn it in decades. And the most frustrating part, if you are a decade trainee, I found for myself the 20-year mark was incredibly frustrating because I knew more than I could do. And when I could do what I knew, I could do more than I knew. So the way it works, you know, you can do, but not that. You learn to do that. And then once you can do that, you know less again. I call it a leapfrog effect. What you know and what you can do are constantly jumping over each other. And that process lasts about 5 years, in my experience. So the progression in training becomes very important at that stage. And you have to keep your eye on the program. And this program takes consistency, it takes intent, it takes focus. And you cannot take your eye off of the direction, that peak that you're looking at. Because as you approach each training goal and surmount it and achieve it, then your knowledge is less than the skill. Then skill becomes more than knowledge. Knowledge becomes more than skill. And it keeps going for about 5 years. It's a very frustrating phase. And I've seen medium-term practitioners, 20-year practitioners, quit because of it. That's because you have to have two things. You have to have belief and faith. You have to believe that what your teacher has taught you is valid. And you have to have faith that the system works. It works to your advantage. And if you don't have belief and faith, then you're not going to achieve your goals even. You might have some mini goals while you're doing your initial phase of training. And I look at a 20-year practitioner as just beginning. So those are some things to consider about your training. Now, progression in training, let's look at that. You learn, first of all, the fundamentals. I don't like to call them basics because many times fundamentals are not basic. But you learn the fundamentals and you apply them to footwork. And you learn to dovetail these two things together over a period of time. Many practitioners call it timing. Timing comes from footwork. But you have to build these fundamentals. And in the Tibetan White Crane Gum Gong that I do, the 45-degree, the gong bow, the arrow, bow and arrow horse is the fundamental of that training because it puts you right on your fighting circle. And as I've said many times, the hardest part of training is staying on your circle. So then you add to that the footwork of the in and out steps. You step in on your circle, then return to circle, or you step out on circle and back to circle. This is fundamental training, but it's incredibly difficult to get into this nervous system to where it becomes reflexive. takes time. Now, you can be a hitter in 9 months. From 9 months to a year, I allowed students to get in these tournaments and hit on other people while they were trying to hit on them. It's hit or miss. What I'm talking to about with decades long training is instilling that instinctive response where you don't have to think about it anymore. It's always there. The more decades you train, the more instilled this response becomes. And it's based on some physiology as well as spiritual and emotional development. It's called chronaxy and rheobase. Chronaxy is that the nerves fire at 144 meters per second. And the rheobase is that you actually expand the surface areas of the nerves. So this is scientific fact. This has been discovered and studied for decades, for about 100 years, actually. So you actually increase your nervous system as you do this more and more and more until finally, when you see an action coming at you, you don't think about it. Your nervous system has been reinforced to the point where you don't have to think about it. It's what's called thought and action become one. So the progression in training is very important. You start at one place, and I always look at it as blocks of training or like box cars on a train. Each boxcar is filled with certain things, certain moves, certain skill sets you have to learn, certain emotional and spiritual components that have to be integrated at that in that boxcar. And then you move on to the next boxcar, and then the next, and then the next, and then the next. And after a number of decades, you have a really long boxcar. And each one of them is filled with different things, but each one of them is connected to the others. So there's a connectivity to progression and training. It's called synctium. And that comes from when two nerve cells are teased together in a Petri dish, they start firing together. They become in sync with each other. So your body has to become in sync with itself. And you've got like 4 trillion cells in your body, and they all have to become integrated with the training. And the other thing is conditioning. There's a lot of guys that show fancy moves and fancy techniques and so on. And you look at their wrists and they're like little tiny things. If you look at my wrists, that's from all of my training. It's conditioning. The organs expand. The bone structure becomes dense and thicker. Everything changes over time because of the training progression. And you get pretty tough. And I don't mean like tattoos and nose rings and all that, but you get pretty tough as a practitioner by virtue of just doing it so long. It's part of the progression of training. And there are techniques that that are shown, like for instance, the Taksao. Person says, "Oh, you can do this one." Well, you will break your wrist if you do that. If I do it, it's like hitting with a fist because of the conditioning. One reason we have arm palm training is to condition that. So these are some of the various considerations of correct training, training in a direction, And also, I might add here, this thing of doing a whole bunch of different stuff and combining it together to create your own system. Um, there are some arts that are totally incompatible with others, and it's not a good idea. And if you are going to train things other than Tibetan White Crane, for instance, train it all separate. Now, I've trained Taiji Shingi Bagua, Liu Kabafa for going on 40 years, but I always train everything separate. And my primary training, of course, is the crane. So when you are studying different types of training, train them separate. And in each one, you have to establish your direction and your goals. And you have to treat them separately in that. So those are just a few of the observations based upon things I've heard or read or seen, especially on Facebook, in the last month. I just thought I'd share some of my experience with that with you. There's two people on here. Would you like to talk? Oh, yes. One other thing I will mention. One reason for progression in training, and progression is slow, it's grueling, it's boring at times, but it's a program. The reason for that is to minimize injuries. Because if you do something that is beyond what you are conditioned for, you're going to hurt yourself. I guarantee that. So, you have to be humble and don't try to movie star or kung fu cowboy and be cool about it. Be humble, be quiet in your training, and just grind it. And then something happens about 35-year level. It all changes. You start internalizing the training. And a lot of people focus on Tai Chi, especially of internal power. I've frankly never seen that work in combat. It's pretty and it sounds good and it's a lot of fun. And I've done Qigong and all that stuff myself. I know about it. But if you want combat efficacy, something that works like a Jeep, can go anywhere, you've got to train from the outside in. And that requires a grind. These guys still aren't talking yet. Who are you? Say hi. Say something. Tired of listening to myself. Well, that's all I've got for today. And if people don't want to talk, always remember, train with pure heart. Train for life. Smith out.